Welcome to second division women's football.
Well, I've never coached women before.
Hey, are you all decent?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Hornik, The Independent.
And I'm Kevin Perry, The Independent.
Ted Lasso is back on Apple TV and we are diving in. Season 4, Episode 2 picks up with Ted back in England to coach the AFC Richmond Lady Greyhounds. The episode was busy. Kevin, what was your first impression of the return to Richmond?
Well, my first impression was I thought it was very funny that the gorgeous flat Ted wakes up in at the beginning of the episode turns out to be right above the pub, his favorite pub in Richmond. Yeah, a quick message to any Americans visiting London: do not expect all the accommodation to look like that, especially if it's upstairs from a pub. It's definitely in the realms of a kind of New York apartment from Friends. It's unrealistically spacious. Um, but aside from that, I love the way we kind of dropped back into that world. We got the good Elton John needle drop.
Mm.
I really enjoyed the increasingly unhinged this morning segments that kind of teed up his days in England. And generally, I thought that this was an episode that kind of let Ted get back to doing what he does best.
Mm.
Of course, winning over a cynical newcomer with his sheer undimmable folksiness. What about you, Caitlin?
Yeah, I totally agree. It did feel a little jam-packed to me, like they were trying to cram in a lot of exposition to set up the rest of the season. I thought it was interesting and necessary for the writers to highlight the lack of equity in women and men's sports. But shoehorning the Lady Greyhounds into like a closet-sized locker room with a single shower and a urinal, compared to like the massive sprawling locker room that the AFC Richmond men's team has. And then there was this like exhausting recurrence of a financial report that Leslie did for Rebecca, about the viability of the women's team. And then on top of that, Rebecca was like grappling with her own feminism and what it means to her, and kind of all these different layers around having a women's team. They're all important conversations to have, especially in 2026 around women's sports. It just felt like a lot for a single episode. Um, Kevin, do you think Ted is the right person or the right character to address like the women's sports controversy?
I think so. I mean, I don't know if he's going to have all the answers,
Mm.
but he's definitely, the show is definitely asking some pertinent questions. As you say, that the kind of the locker room was a neat way of showing some disparity there. And there's the press conference, of course, when he turns up and he's getting asked just about the men's team.
Hmm.
Uh, I was sad to see no Trent Krim back in the press room,
Yeah,
but
where was he?
maybe he's working on another book or something. But I mean, obviously, we've been following the news this week. Women's sports have become this huge kind of hot topic in American
Mhm.
culture at the moment. Obviously, pushed kind of by a lot of right-wing commentators. Big controversy in the WNBA, where this player Sophie Cunningham, who plays for the Indiana Fever, she's come out strongly against allowing trans women to play. It's
Mhm.
kind of a made-up controversy. I don't think there are any kind of trans women who are applying to play in the WNBA, but it is becoming very heated. I don't know whether Ted Lasso will touch on this. Obviously,
Mhm.
we have you know, it, we've seen in the past it's kind of touched on kind of homosexuality in the men's game, and so it's not completely averse to going into these kind of hot topic debates. But certainly, I think it's admirable for the show and the show's creators to kind of use this new season to kind of turn this spotlight of this big show,
Mhm.
and use it as a way to kind of elevate women's sports, which maybe feels a little bit kind of in need of that spotlight in a way that maybe it was doing to soccer and football a few years ago.
Mhm.
Uh, what do you think? Do you think Ted has something to kind of add to this debate or something interesting to say here?
I mean, with his, signature one-liners and his humor, like there's always something for Ted to add.
Mhm.
And to create a moment around something in that episode, right? Or something in the series. And I think the women's sports controversy could be that. So he could be the right person, with something valuable to say. I think it's coincidental that we're getting this like women's team focused version of Ted Lasso at the same time the WNBA controversy is heating up. And while the Women's Pro Baseball League is launching its historic inaugural season, which I touched upon last week, we know that women's sports have like generally kind of taken a backseat to men's historically. But the tides might be turning just a little bit. In 2024, the NCAA National Women's Basketball Championship game was viewed by more people than the men's final was, with an average of like 18.7 million viewers, which is pretty substantial for a college basketball championship. And that was because of players like Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark and kind of the excitement around the game and those players. And this year's women's final was the third most watched college women's basketball game with 9.9 million viewers. So it shows that there's this hunger for women's sports, right? There's an appetite for it. People are invested. They want to, watch these women play and thrive and, accomplish these amazing feats. So there's definitely a hunger for women's sports. And, I'm curious to see like how Ted Lasso, kind of amplifies that. So, okay, last week we said, or you said you were on the fence about the new season. Did
Good.
episode 2 win you over? Like, how are we feeling after this?
I mean, I still think this season feels more like a kind of spin-off than a sequel
Mm,
necessarily to the original show, but that's not a bad thing. It can kind of be its own thing and stand on its own 2 feet, I think. I am hoping that they kind of up the stakes a little bit more or kind of land the stakes. I've noticed there's a kind of trend in this show. Last episode, we were kind of Ted seemed to have this dilemma where it's like, do I stay with my son or do I go back to England? And
mm,
at the end, we were kind of there was a kind of a get out where it's like, oh, I'll just take my son to England. This episode again, there was a kind of the dilemma presented between is he going to convince this female coach Alice Chilton to stay, or is he going to reunite with Coach Beard by the end of the episode? Maybe he'll have both of them. So I kind of like them to land the stakes a little bit more. And maybe that will come when we finally see some football,
yeah.
which I haven't seen too much of yet. So yeah, I think there's still more to come from this season for sure.
No, I totally agree. I think I loved the introduction of Coach Chilton and that character. The just the stone-faced kind of coldness or hardness next to Ted's, jovial, buoyant personality is really interesting. So I'm curious to see kind of how that shapes the rest of the season. But I like that her character is kind of so different to anyone we've seen on the show thus far. I mean, even Rebecca, for as stony as she can be, she's got a heart, right? And we did see a little bit of that with Coach Chilton. We saw some of those edges soften as Ted kind of wore her down with his relentless optimism and those zingy one-liners and his, is like quintessential Missouri humor. So yeah, I'm excited to see where the season goes. I think there's episode 2 left a lot to be desired, but there's still so much room and so many episodes left. So we'll see what happens.